Chapter 8, Delilah. The story of Samson is one of the saddest stories I've read in the whole Bible, and I could cry when I think of the way he was so abused by the women he loved. I've often heard sermons slandering the character of Samson. Preachers insult him by saying he had a problem with women and was a womanizer. I actually think that they do this man a great injustice and have not read the scriptures with any measure of understanding. He's even listed among the cloud of witnesses in Hebrews 11 verse 32, whom we are to read about for inspiration and look to as examples of faith. A more in-depth study will show an unbiased person a very different story. Chosen vessel. When the angel came to Samson's barren mother to tell her that she would conceive and bear a son, he made it very clear that this was no ordinary child. She was told to, in Judges 13 verses 4 and 5, drink no wine or strong drink, to eat nothing unclean, and not to allow a razor to come upon his head, for this child would be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death, and he would begin to deliver his people from the Philistines. Samson's first recorded encounter with a female was when he had spotted a young Philistine woman in Timnath and wanted his parents to get her for him to wife. This, in actual fact, was a very honourable request. He wasn't sleeping around having affairs. In fact, the only objection his parents had was the fact that she was a Philistine and not a Jewess. Judges 14:3 says, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all my people that you go to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines?" There must have been many beautiful women among the Israelites, but none of them appealed to Samson. They weren't to his taste. We're not all the same. Some people prefer mates from different countries. It adds to their mystery, perhaps. Samson's parents were very distressed because it was against their law for Israelites to marry foreigners, and they had taken every care to bring him up as a Nazarite to God. They certainly didn't realize that this dissatisfaction had been placed in his heart by the Lord because he was picking a fight. Judges 14:4. But his father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought an occasion against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Samson courted the young woman, fell in love with her, and made arrangements to marry her. But it was during the actual wedding festivities that the fight occurred. On the very first day of the wedding celebrations, Samson set forth a riddle for the 30 Philistine guests to solve. On the very first day of his wedding celebrations, Samson set forth a riddle for the 30 Philistine guests to solve. He agreed that if they worked out the answer at the end of the 7-day feast, he would give each of them a sheet and a change of clothes. If, on the other hand, they couldn't solve the riddle, then they would have to give him 30 sheets and 30 changes of clothes. That was fair. The Philistines accepted the challenge, but grew very anxious when they realized they couldn't solve the riddle. They threatened Samson's new bride, saying that unless she found out the answer and told them, they would burn her and her father's house with fire. Obviously, the young woman was terrified and did her best to find the answer, but Samson wasn't giving anything away. She wept before him the whole 7 days, saying, "How can you say you love me when you won't tell me the answer?" On the 7th day, she had completely worn him down with her tears and pleas, so he told her the answer. She immediately told the Philistines, who in turn told Samson. He'd been betrayed by his new bride, the woman he loved, and was being taken advantage of. He was so angry that he went out and killed 30 Philistines, took their spoil and gave their clothes to those who had expounded the riddle, and was so angry because he had been manipulated so easily that he went back to live with his parents. Samson was not a hard man. It wasn't long before he thought things through, softened up, again making excuses for his wife, and went to visit her at her father's house with a kid as a peace offering, only to be stopped in his tracks. The girl's father had assumed that Samson would by now have hated the girl, so he had given her to Samson's companion. He then offered Samson her younger sister, whom he said was fairer. How could this be? Surely his father-in-law could understand his need for a little space to get over the pain of his new wife exposing him to her Philistine countrymen at their very wedding feast. He had been hurt, yes, but now he was over it and had forgiven her, having considered it as being nothing more than a lover's spat. To give her to his companion without even asking Samson how he felt about her now was totally unreasonable, unjustified, and uncalled for. Now Samson was angry, really angry, so angry that he destroyed all the Philistine crops, using foxes to run through the fields with burning brands tied to their knotted tails. This experience of being betrayed by someone he really loved hurt him so deeply he didn't touch women again for at least 20 years, during which time he was a judge in Israel. Samson, to me, comes across as a very passionate, emotional man in search of someone who will passionately love him back. I can feel the hurt, frustration and disappointment in all his actions. The Bible doesn't seem to hide any of Samson's encounters with the opposite sex. Even one-night stands are recorded, for it tells us of a brief fling he had with a harlot in Gaza. Shortly after this, he met his Goliath, Delilah. She bewitched him, for he fell head over heels in love with her. She didn't love him. This was completely one-sided. His need of her was so great that he didn't even realize she didn't love him. Once the Philistines got wind that Samson was seeing her, they put out the bait. Judges 16 verse 5 tells us, "Entice him. See where his great strength lies, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind and afflict him. And we will give you, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver." That was some bait. Samson was as soft as putty in the hands of this woman. She was an expert seductress and manipulated him so well she could wrap him around her little finger. It seemed crazy to me that Samson didn't see what she was doing. But God was picking another fight with the Philistines and allowed Samson to be blinded and overpowered yet again by love. What a malicious, wicked, evil woman Delilah was. She knew the Philistines just wanted to overpower him so that they could kill him, yet she plotted with them. Samson may have been weak where love was concerned, but she was ambitious, greedy, and very covetous. The Bible states that the love of money is the root of all evil. How true, for the silver the Philistines had promised blinded her to the fact that here was a super strong man who loved so deeply that he was willing to devote himself to her. She was callous and abused his love for her own selfish gain. 3 times she put him to the test by getting him to tell her how he could be overcome, actually trying it out on him. Then when she said the Philistines were here to get him, he would break free without a struggle. Why could he not see? How deeply this man must have loved her. How desperate was he to want to believe she loved him too, that he had nothing to fear from her. How deceived can a man who is passionately in love be? Judges 16 verse 16 to 17 says this, "And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, There has not come a razor upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man." This story is actually a testimony as to what kind of true Israel Samson was. He never fought or strayed from his calling as a Nazarite and stayed true to God his entire life. He knew in his spirit there was a purpose for him to fulfill and made many enemies doing God's will. Judges 16 verses 17 to 20 tells us this. But when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up this once, for he has shown me all his heart." Then the lords of the Philistines came and brought money in their hand. And she made Samson fall asleep upon her knees. And she called for a man. And she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head and began to afflict him. And his strength went from him. And she said, "The Philistines be upon you, Samson." And he awoke out of his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times before and shake myself." And he didn't even realize that the Lord was departed from him. The fact that she applied the razor to his head didn't only rob him of his strength, she broke his heart. He must have been devastated and full of confusion as the realization of what had taken place stripped him of any faith he had left in women. His relationship with Delilah was immediately cut off, but worse still, God had left him. By the flattery of their tongue or the seduction of their bodies, ungodly, covetous women can get what they want. They can even bring down and destroy extremely powerful men. Proverbs 5 verses 3 to 8 tells us this. For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a 2-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold on hell. Lest thou should ponder the path of life, her ways are movable, that you cannot know them. Hear me now, therefore, O you children, and depart not from the words of my mouth. Remove your way far from her, and come not nigh the door of her house.